Okay, thanks for joining me in this second part of this MongoDB video collection. We're going to move on to the next bit, which is actually talking about common pipes that I used or methods that I used whilst working with a MongoDB database for the last 2 years in industry. So I don't really want this to turn into like a MongoDB tutorial. I just want to talk about like things that I found useful. But just firstly, to clarify, there is a bit of an anomaly. Like most of the pipes you will use will say update one or update many. But for some strange reason, find is an anomaly here. So it's either find or find one. The aggregation pipeline is mainly used for like the main data set that you want to bring back to your front end. If your query has errors, so if you write some code in Visual Studio Code, it will chuck an error for you. Right, and then I found this out the other day. I actually thought this was a MongoDB thing, but it actually turns out to be a Mongoose thing, but just for reference. So when you're wanting to find something and you're using an object ID, you have to wrap it around this object ID object, for want of a better word, and then you can run the query and it will bring back the results. Now you only had to wrap it with this object ID in Mongoose in the aggregation query. In all the others, so if you were using find one, update many, anything like that, you didn't have to use the object ID because it could just work with it as a string because it was expecting you to have that in a particular part of the pipe. So you didn't need to use the object ID. So that's just for reference more than anything. And then every base object that's created within MongoDB gets an underscore ID. It can't not have an underscore ID. And normally it will just put this like grid there for you to that it generates automatically. But you can manipulate that and have it set you want. So if you wanted it 1, 2, 3, 4 or whatever, you could actually do that. Okay, so we've got some examples to work on here in Visual Studio Code. If I was wanting to use just like this basic find pipe, I can put like anything that I want to query within like the first curly bracket. So here, if I had other things, then I could put like underscore like ID and it might equal 4 or something like that. So if I was to run this query now, it brings back everything that matches this object ID, which I've got to wrap with this object ID object, and then also anything with underscore ID 4. If I was to change that to like 5 and then run it, it won't bring anything back. Okay, so you can see that works simply in VS Code. And then here, this is an example of inserting data. So if I wanted to, I could just chuck this data, even though it's got no similar shape to like what we just saw from the other data. If I run this, it will create an insertion of data. So if we go back to this query here and change this so that we want to have a look at ID 100 and run it, we can see that it brings back this data that's got no structural characteristics that are the same to the original data set, but it will put it in because MongoDB doesn't care. But also the other thing that we can see here is that we didn't declare underscore ID, so it's automatically generated this underscore ID for us here. And then if we wanted to get rid of that data, it's as simple as just deleting it. So we can run a delete one pipe or delete many pipe and then just run this. And it's told us that it's deleted everything that had a matching key value pair of ID equals to 100. So now if we try and run this find one, it won't bring any data back for us. Okay, so that's those examples done. Right, let's move on to the next slide. Right, array filters. So this was the real game changer for me when I started working with MongoDB, because I was new to a NoSQL language, and documents were just very confusing. I was relatively new to JavaScript at the time, and like I had these embedded nested arrays that were inside objects of objects and arrays within arrays, and these array filters really help you kind of get through this. So from the front end, if I was doing something and I wanted to bring back a certain bit of data that I knew was nested within inside the document, I could pass an object that would contain like the IDs of those nested items that I'd want, and then I'm going to flatten out the object to be able to get to them. So let's see an example, because I think this will make it clear. So if we do the examples for slide 4. So here we've got, I'm saying that I want to find a document with an ID of 3, but then I'm saying I want to look for an underscore ID with an object ID of this, and then I'm going to assign the index that it finds for that to label 1, and then I'm going to use that index to denote the position of the telephone number that I want to update, because we're doing an update 1 here. So we're saying that we're going to look inside the phone array, index position of whatever the array filters brings back, and then the key of number, I'm going to set it to this. So if we look at it first of all, so if we just do this find, we can see if we look in the phones that this ID that we're looking for here, 7007, oh, I like that one, has got a number that looks like this. And I'm going to change it to this number here that looks like that. So if we get rid of that, let's undo this here. And then if we run it, we can see now, if we look at it, it's now got that updated. And what it's done is it's used, this is inside an array. So we can see that this phone is an array. It's found that element within the array, the index position of it, and then updated it for me. And quite often it's underscore ID, but it's not always underscore ID. It might be, it might have its own unique reference. So here, like I've created data, so let's comment this out again and then have a look at the data. And we can see here in the emails array that rather than having underscore ID, I've used email ID instead. And this is the reference for the object within the array. So I can use that one instead. And all I'm doing here is saying that I want to find a document with an ID of 3. In the array filters, I want to find an email ID with this object ID, and I'm going to assign that to label 1. And then I'm going to set in the emails array at index position, whatever is returned from the array filters, with the key of type to work. So now if we run that, we can see that it's changed it to work. And as I said, that was huge for me once I found and started getting used to array filters, because it just makes it so much easier to get to the data that you want. Right, the next thing, aggregation and the pipeline. So the 4 most common pipelines that I've used here is the unwind and project. They're my 2 main ones, and then group and then lookup. The principles of using data. Yeah, so by using the unwind and the project, it really enables us to be able to just bring back the bare minimum of what's needed for whatever we're using on the front end. So we're not bringing back a huge document with loads of data in it and then having to sift through that on the front end. If we can do it all on the back end, it's faster, and also it's safer and less code to have to write on the front end. So let's do some demonstrations of this. We're on slide 5, aren't we? Yeah, we're on slide 5. So if we have a look at this, now I'm just going to comment out these other bits to this example. So this is what the aggregation pipeline looks like. So I'm saying I'm doing first of all a match on this object here, and then I'm going to unwind phones. So as we saw in the last one, phones is an array, so we're going to unwind it. So what this will do now is it will flatten it out. So rather than having a singular document with an array with 2 items in it, we will now end up with 2 documents with no array and 2 objects inside it, like 1 object in each one of the objects returned. So it's probably better if I visualize that for you. So if I run this without the unwind, we can see that we've got our phones here and it's got 2 objects inside the array. But if I put the unwind back in, like this, and then run it again, we now no longer have an array inside the document. It's just an object with a key of phone, and then we've got a second document now here with another key value pair which contains an object of the phone's object. So we can see it a bit clearer if I collapse these. So now we've got 2 objects and it's been flattened out for us. The project is a lot like in SQL, where you might just want to bring back certain columns from a table. You don't want to bring back all the columns normally when you're working with SQL. And this is a lot like that. So if you don't, it will always bring back the main underscore ID on the project unless you tell it not to. So by me declaring this to 0, it won't bring back the underscore ID. It will bring me back the name because I've set that to 1. But the great thing here is, so we've got these nested items. So we've got phone, we'll end up with phone.type because we're going to have to use dot notation to get to whatever we want. So we can do like we can in SQL, where we're going to give this an alias now. And we're going to say that we want this as phone type, and then we want phone number as phone number. So now, and once you've declared those names in your aggregation pipeline, you can use them. So here you can see I'm going to sort on phone type. That didn't exist beforehand, and now because I've used the project, after the project I can reference it now. I don't have to do phones.type and then sort it by that. So if we run that aggregated pipeline now, we can see that we still get the same 2 objects back, but only the bits that we've put in the project. There's no underscore ID because I told it not to, and then we just got name, phone type and phone number for the 2 items. Okay, so that's unwind, that's project. The next bit that we're going to move on to is the lookup. So I'm just going to create some data to be able to do a lookup here. So let me just comment this back out like that. And then I'm just going to create this data here. So we're going to end up, at this moment in time, if we look at our instance, we can see that it doesn't even have this collection that I'm about to build. So the only collection it's got is this example datas. But I'm about to create this one called example types. So this is where again I say like it's risky with MongoDB because it will just do what it tells you. So if I run that, we've now got this collection of example types on that instance of MongoDB. We can even see it if we come back here and I hit refresh on that. We can see that new collection's appeared, and it will have the documents in it that I've created. Okay. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to unwind the phones part of the document. So all of the documents, unwind the phones, and then I'm going to project it to look like this. So now if I run that, oh, I've just got to delete this, sorry. So now if I run this, we can see that we're getting back all of the 10 documents that we've got in here, and it's well, there'll be 20 I think in here now because it will be 1 object per item within the phones array. so we've got all of these here, and then it's got like different phone types, mobile work. And what I want to do is I'm going to work, the lookup is like if you're working with a relational database in SQL. So I want to connect that types collection to this collection. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say from example types, which is what we've just created here. The local field is now going to be phone type because I've just created that with a project. The foreign field is going to be the types type, which is what I've created in these objects here. And then I'm going to alias this with phone details. Just exactly the same as if you've done a join inside SQL, you put an alias on the end of it to be able to reference it. So now if I run that, it will make no difference to the data because, well, it's shown it because I've added that after the project, so it does make sense. So now we've got all of that data connected to each one of these using that lookup. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to unwind that data that we've connected, and then I'm going to run a project which is now going to include it. So I will use the phone's details and then the dot notation of what I want to access in it. So I've got the type's name here, and then I'll have an underscore ID in there, so I'm going to put the underscore in there and put that as phone type ID. So now if I run this code, we can see that each one of the objects has now got the new phone type, which is type e-mobile, and then here it's got like the underscore ID that was created when I created these types here for the example types. So it's connected those two bits of data, two collections now connected together. Then I can do a group on these. So what just happened there? So if I do a group, project it. So the group is a lot like when you do a subquery in SQL. So you might have some items that you get inside the query, and then you want to find out the quantity of each one of those items in there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to group by the phone new name, which is that field that we created, and then I'm going to do a sum. So for each, that's almost like a count really, because it's for each one that's in there, it's going to sum it. And then I'm going to project that out and then produce this on the screen. So if I project it out, we can see that we've got 10 with the type of mobile and we've got 10 with the type of work. Okay, so that's example that. Right, so dynamic aggregation queries. So this was like the second thing that was like really useful to me whilst working with MongoDB, and I wanted to share this because like there we've been explicitly knowing what we want to filter the data by, but quite often you'll have things that look like this where there's different fields that you might want to filter on, and the user doesn't always populate all of them. So there might be occasions where like you're not going to get anything back. So if you pass that to the back end, it will cause it to fall over because it's expecting you to query something on this, but then it's got nothing to query on it. So again, let's do an example of this and it will hopefully make it more clear. Let's just get rid of that. Right, so what we've got here is, if we could imagine that we're sending from the front end to the back end some parameters that we want to query on the back end. And here we're going to have some underscore IDs that we want to bring back and some IDs that we want to filter by. And on this occasion, when the request has come from the front end to the back end, we've got two object IDs and no IDs that we want to filter by. So what this will do here is we can literally set, so we've got two variables declared here, and we can literally set to the variables a MongoDB function, like a MongoDB method. So here what we're saying is that if the params have got a length, so if they've got something inside the array, then we want to say that we want to do the params underscore ID in. We're running the MongoDB in function, so we're using like the context of looking inside the array. Else we'll do a not equal to null. So basically it will, if it's something there, it will filter by it. If there's nothing there, then it will just bring everything back because it will be everything that's not equal to null. And then we're doing exactly the same check for like the second key value pair that we've got in this object that I'm sending to this fictitious backend. The only thing that I've had to add here is this if statement, because for these, when they arrive on the back end, they arrive as strings. So you've got to convert them to object IDs if you want to be able to filter by an object ID on the back end. So we're just basically adding this object ID object to these IDs that we've sent to the back end. We don't need to do it on this other one because that's just a number and it will just be able to filter it as numbers. So that's fine. So once we've created these variables, we can literally just drop them into our aggregation pipeline. So we can see that I've literally just added them here. So we've got a match, and then this is going to match on this detail. So effectively, this bit of code here is going to be what we've got here. So it would be effectively like that, but with the actual details of the IDs that we've got there. We could actually just replace this whole bit here. We can do whatever. We could replace like the whole aggregation query if we wanted to, because we can set, it just treats it like a string. So we can just put like these MongoDB methods for the aggregation pipeline into a variable, so it can just go in line as well. So sometimes like it would just have it here as part of the actual process that it's running through. So we're going to do that, and then we're going to pass it through, and then we're just going to project it out. So if I run that, we'll see that we get two objects back that have matched these two IDs. If I was to comment that one out and then switch it to this one and then run it, we'll see that it will still work and it will bring back 4 and 6 because that's what we've got there. If I comment that out and then run this one and we're not passing any IDs to the back end, then it just brings back all 10 records that we've got in the collection. The final thing that I've got to show you here is that sometimes if you're doing some sort of evaluation of object IDs on the back end, you need to use toString on them. You need to convert, because they're the same as in SQL. Like if you tried to say, does this object look like this object, it will return false because it can't do that comparison. So the same here with object IDs. You've got to convert them to strings, so you need to use that .toStrings to be able to actually do the comparison of them. And then that's it. That's everything. That just came down. And then if we look here, this is the final one, and this was just meant to be like an example of what a Mongoose schema will look like, and just some quirks of Mongoose. So if I bring this up. So we've got this collection that's called example datas. If we look here on the database, we can see that it's called example datas. And to be able to link your Mongoose schema, which is what we've created here, we've got a Mongoose schema here, to this collection, we need to change it slightly. We need to drop the S, so there should always be an S after your collection name. And we just need to capitalize the first letter, and then the rest of them are lowercase. And then we assign it to this schema name here. So that's one quirk with Mongoose. And then the other thing that it will do as well is it will track a version of each of these models. So if I was to come in here and alter this and then add some new data, that would move to like version 2. I never really wanted that because it just looked weird on each of the records, because you'd get like underscore V, and it just looked weird. So you can just put this version key here, set to false, and then it won't put that on each of your documents. And then we can just see here that if you're using if you're using an object ID, then you can just set it to an object ID there in the types. The rest of the types are all pretty simple, you know, it's just like string or boolean or number or whatever. And that's it. That's all that I wanted to share with you from my experience of working with MongoDB for the last couple of years. Hopefully it's a help. Yeah, thanks. Bye.